Welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we're tackling a figure whose life was just monumental. I mean, the name Gandhi is almost inseparable from the title he was given, Mahatma.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that word, Mahatma, great soul, or venerable in Sanskrit, that's really our starting point, isn't it? Because to get at Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, you have to look beyond the icon.
Right. Beyond the simple image of nonviolent resistance, we need to dive into the struggles, the contradictions, and frankly, the incredible transformation he went through.
So that's our mission today. We're doing a deep dive into, well, a mountain of source material about his journey. We want to trace how this shy, quite ambitious young lawyer trained in London
Spends 21 really defining years in South Africa.
and then returns home at 45 to become this global figure leading India's independence.
And that evolution is key. It wasn't like he arrived fully formed. His ideas, his methods, they developed over time.
So we'll look at his early years, the sort of ethical foundations, then South Africa, the real testing ground,
The crucible, as you called it.
then the big campaigns back in India. And finally, we'll try to unpack those principles he lived by the political and the personal, which were often deeply intertwined and, frankly, pretty demanding.
Exactly. So let's start at the beginning. Part 1, Foundations and the Student of Law, covering roughly 1869 to 1893.
Okay, let's unpack this. He was born Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Porbandar, Gujarat, 1869. What kind of world was that? What shaped him early on?
Well, he was from the Hindu Mahbanaya caste, so a background in sort of commerce and tradition. But the big influence really was his mother, Putlabai.
The sources really emphasize her piety, don't they?
Immensely pious, known for these incredibly difficult fasts. I mean, sometimes she wouldn't eat for days until her daily prayers were done, regardless of the weather or circumstances. That kind of self-denial, that ethical rigor, it clearly left a huge mark on him.
And even as a kid, you see these contrasting traits. His sister called him restless as Mercury,
Mm-hmm.
but at school,
Mm-hmm.
super shy, quiet, apparently often tongue-tied. It sounds like he lived a lot inside his own head.
He did.
Yeah.
And it was in that internal world that he found his early moral compass. There were these two classic Indian stories, Shravana.
Right, the son devoted to his parents.
Exactly. And King Harish Chandra, who sacrificed everything for truth and love. Gandhi himself wrote later that seeing plays about them just, well, it hit him deeply. It gave him this early identification with truth, with Sakya as the highest value.
And then there's his marriage, which happened incredibly young. He was 13, Kasturba was 14, typical for the time, but his later reflections on it are quite revealing.
Oh, intensely self-critical. He talks about feeling intense regret over his jealousy, his, what he called his lustful feelings for his young wife. He even mentioned being distracted in school, just anticipating seeing her at night.
It sounds like a real internal battle, even then, trying to control these impulses he saw as base.
Definitely. It was an early personal struggle for self-mastery.
And that struggle connects to a really painful moment in 1885.
Yes, a double tragedy, really. His father, Karamchand, passed away. And Gandhi was tormented because moments before his father died, he'd actually left his bedside to be with Kasturba.
Oh, wow.
He wrote later about the animal passion that blinded him, preventing him from being there at the very end. And then compounding that grief, their first child died just shortly after birth that same year. It was a period marked by loss and, in his mind, a failure of his own self-control.
That drive to overcome his own limitations seems to be part of what pushed him towards studying law in London in 1888. He wanted to improve himself, move forward.
Absolutely. He enrolled at the Inner Temple. But getting there involved another layer of ethical commitment. His mother was, understandably, very worried about him going abroad, about, picking up Western habits.
Because he made that vow.
A really radical vow, yes. Before leaving India, he solemnly promised her he would abstain from meat, alcohol, and women. This wasn't just a casual promise. It became this ironclad rule that shaped his entire experience in England almost immediately.
And that led him straight to the London Vegetarian Society, the LVS.
Right. He didn't just join, he was active. He even served on their executive committee. And this was more important than it might sound because through the LVS, he met people exploring all sorts of philosophies. It actually encouraged him to read the Bhagavad Gita properly for the first time, to really engage with Eastern thought in a more intellectual way.
And it's within the LVS that we see his first real public stand on principle. It's a fascinating little story, almost a microcosm of his later methods.
It really is. A small incident, but very telling. The LVS president, a man named Arnold Hills, quite influential, a big donor,
Okay.
he wanted to kick out another committee member, Thomas Allinson. Why? Because Allinson was advocating for birth control, which Hills thought was immoral and undermined the society's image.
Now, the key thing here is that Gandhi actually agreed with Hills about birth control itself, didn't he? He wasn't a fan of it either.
Exactly. He shared Hills's moral objection to birth control at the time, but, and this is crucial, he fiercely defended Allinson's right to hold a different view.
Ah, so it wasn't about the issue itself, but the principle of allowing dissent.
Precisely. He argued you couldn't just exclude someone because you disagreed with their stance, especially not on procedural grounds related to a separate issue. Here you have this incredibly shy young man who apparently couldn't even bring himself to speak his defense aloud. He had someone else read his written statement.
Wow.
Yet he's standing up to the powerful president on principle, defending someone whose views he doesn't share. It's all about the process, the tolerance for difference.
That's pure satyagraha in embryonic form, isn't it?
Yeah.
Prioritizing procedural justice and the right to differ over the immediate moral argument.
Absolutely. Even though they voted Allinson out anyway, that moment showed that his personal shyness took a back seat when a core principle was at stake. He was called to the bar in '91, returned to India, all set to be a lawyer.
And then face planted.
Pretty much, yeah. His attempt to practice law in Bombay was a complete flop. He famously said he was psychologically unable to cross-examine witnesses.
That shyness again. It crippled him in court.
It did. He ended up back in Rajkot, sort of struggling, doing minor legal work, until this lifeline came from South Africa. A merchant named Dada Abdullah needed legal help with a case in Natal.
So a fresh start.
A one-year contract, 105. Not a huge amount, but it was a way out, a chance. So in 1893, he sails for South Africa, professionally humbled, ethically quite rigid already, but looking for an opportunity.
And you can really see how those personal ethics, the vow, the vegetarianism, that LVS fight, trying to overcome his own sense of failure, laid the groundwork. It's like he was unknowingly building the moral toolkit he'd need.
He was cultivating the inner strength, the moral rigor that he would later demand from millions. South Africa would force him to use it.
Right. Which brings us neatly to part two. The Crucible of South Africa, 1893 to 1914. This is where everything changes, where the private man is forced into the public arena.
And it happens almost immediately upon arrival. The sources are stark. He arrives in 1893, a London-trained barrister with a first-class train ticket, expecting a certain level of respect within the British Empire.
But that's not what he got.
Not at all. He ran headfirst into the brutal reality of racial discrimination against Indians. The famous incident at Pietermaritzburg Station, thrown off the train for refusing to leave the first-class carriage, then beaten by a stagecoach driver for refusing to sit on the floor near the driver's feet, kicked off a public footpath in Pretoria by a policeman. It was just one humiliation after another.
And he'd arrived thinking of himself as, what was it, a Briton first and an Indian second.
Yeah.
Believing his status afforded him some protection.
Exactly. He believed in the system, in the empire's supposed fairness. And suddenly he's being treated like, in the derogatory terms of the time, a coolie. The shock, the cognitive dissonance must have been immense.
That night in the Pietermaritzburg waiting room is legendary. He had a choice.
Go home defeated or stay and fight. He chose to stay. He decided right then and there to protest the injustice, not just for himself, but for the whole Indian community.
And that decision wasn't just theoretical. He immediately started organizing.
Within a year, 1894, he's instrumental in founding the Natal Indian Congress. And this wasn't just, a talking shop. Its specific goal was to unify the fragmented Indian community merchants, indentured laborers, clerks, everyone into a real political force.
What were they fighting against initially?
Discriminatory laws.
Yeah.
Particularly a bill that aimed to strip Indians of the right to vote in Natal. So it was about basic political rights from the start.
And we see that non-retaliation principle emerge early, too, like in 1897, after he came back from India.
Yes, that's another key moment. He'd gone back to India briefly, brought his family over. When he returned to Durban, a white mob attacked him, beat him quite severely. He barely escaped.
And his response?
He refused to press charges against his attackers. He stated publicly that his goal wasn't punishment, but to win them over, to change their hearts and minds through reason and his own conduct. Even facing violence, he defaulted to a kind of moral persuasion.
Okay, but then we get to the Boer War in 1900. And here's where it gets tricky for many people. He volunteers in ambulance corps for the British. How does the future apostle of nonviolence support a military campaign?
It's definitely complex, and the sources suggest a couple of layers. One reason was quite pragmatic, even political.
Right.
He wanted to challenge that pervasive British stereotype that Hindus, and Indians generally, were somehow unfit for manly activities, that they were cowardly or effeminate. This stereotype was constantly used to deny them rights.
So organizing the Natal Indian Ambulance Corps with 1,100 volunteers was a way to prove them wrong, show courage and service.
Exactly, to show they could contribute, that they were loyal subjects deserving of rights. But there's a deeper philosophical angle, too, which connects to his later ideas about ahimsa.
Which is.
Well, later thinkers like Christian Bartolf argued that Gandhi believed true nonviolence, ahimsa, wasn't possible if it came from a place of fear or weakness. His view, developing even then, was that you had to be capable of violence, or at least capable of bravery in facing danger, before you could consciously choose nonviolence as the higher path. Nonviolence out of cowardice meant nothing.
So serving in the war, facing danger, carrying wounded soldiers under fire, which they did, famously at Spienkop.
Yes, and they received the Queen's South Africa Medal for it.
That was demonstrating the courage necessary to later choose nonviolence from a position of strength.
That seems to be the underlying logic. First, prove you're not a coward. Then you can embrace the superior moral force of ahimsa. It's a step-by-step thing in his mind.
Okay. The big catalyst for his specific method, satyagraha, comes a few years later, though, in 1906.
The Transvaal Asiatic Registration Act. This was deeply offensive. It required all Asians, men, women over 8 years old, to register, be fingerprinted, and carry an identity certificate at all times.
Like criminals.
Exactly. It was a system of biometric surveillance treating an entire community as suspect. Gandhi initially explored voluntary registration, but quickly saw it as an unacceptable assault on basic human dignity.
And this sparks the first use of satyagraha.
Yes. At a huge mass meeting in Johannesburg, September 11th, 1906, he introduces this still evolving methodology, satyagraha, literally truth force, or holding on to truth. It meant organized, nonviolent, non-cooperation, resisting the law, peacefully, accepting the consequences, aiming to convert the opponent through soul force, not physical force.
Now, before we leave South Africa, we have to address the elephant in the room. His early views on race, specifically towards Africans, the sources are quite clear he held some prejudiced views initially.
Yes, and it's absolutely crucial to acknowledge this. It's not something to be glossed over. In his early years in South Africa, Gandhi's focus was almost entirely on securing rights for the Indian community, and he did so by sometimes adopting the existing racial hierarchies of the British Empire.
So he argued Indians were different, superior even to native Africans.
He did. There's that 1895 legal brief where he argues Indians shouldn't be lumped in with Africans because, he claimed, Anglo-Saxons and Indians shared a common Aryan stock. And in 96, he complained about whites degrading the Indian to the level of a raw kafir, using that deeply offensive slur.
Which reflects the thinking of the time? Perhaps. But it shows he was initially fighting for a better place within the colonial hierarchy, not necessarily for universal equality.
That seems fair, yes. He saw Indians as potential partners of the British, deserving better treatment than Africans, but, and this is equally important, the sources also show his views evolved significantly over his 21 years there.
How so?
By the later part of his stay, his newspaper, Indian Opinion, was condemning discrimination against Africans. He and his colleagues were helping Africans, serving as nurses sometimes. He later explicitly acknowledged Africans as the original inhabitants of the land and spoke out against colonial land grabs.
It was a journey for him on that front, too.
A definite evolution. Which is why someone like Nelson Mandela, while aware of the early problematic statements, could still see Gandhi's later anti-racism work in Africa as inspirational, saying he felt he completed what Gandhi started.
And this whole period culminates in setting up Tolstoy Farm in 1910.
Right, near Johannesburg. A cooperative community, a sort of laboratory for self-sufficiency and practicing peaceful resistance. It really cemented the transformation. The lawyer had become the satyagrahi.
So in 1915, he returns to India. He's 45. He's been fundamentally changed by South Africa. This takes us to part 3, leading the Indian independence struggle 1915 to 1947.
He comes back at the urging of Gopal Krishna Gokhale, a senior leader in the Indian National Congress. Gokhale advises him to spend a year just traveling India, observing, listening, before jumping into politics.
And then he starts applying the South African playbook to local Indian issues.
Exactly. Starting with Champaran in Bihar in 1917. This was a major early victory.
There's the issue there.
Impoverished tenant farmers were being forced by British planters to grow indigo. a cash crop nobody really wanted anymore because of synthetic dyes.
Uh-huh.
And they had to sell it at rock-bottom prices set by the planters. It was pure exploitation. Gandhi went there, meticulously gathered evidence, organized the peasants in disciplined, nonviolent protest and civil disobedience.
And it worked.
It did. The local authorities were completely flummoxed by this kind of organized, peaceful mass resistance. They eventually gave in, abolished the forced indigo cultivation system, and made concessions. It proved the method could work in India.
Then came Quetta in 1918,
Uh-huh.
another agricultural struggle.
Yes. This time in Gujarat, there had been floods, famine, a crop failure, but the British authorities insisted on collecting the full land tax anyway.
So Gandhi organized tax resistance.
He did, working closely with a young lawyer named Vallabhbhai Patel, who would become a key lieutenant. They organized the peasants to pledge non-payment, even if it meant losing their land. They held firm for months, completely non-violently.
And the outcome?
Again, the government eventually had to compromise. They agreed to suspend tax collection for that year and the next and return confiscated property. These wins in Champaran and Quetta were huge. They showed Gandhi could mobilize the rural masses and that satyagraha was a powerful tool against civic grievances.
But the national political scene really heats up after World War I, right? There was a lot of expectation.
Huge expectation. India had contributed massively to the British war effort, soldiers, resources. The promise, or at least the hope, was significant steps towards self-rule, towards Swaraj.
But Britain didn't deliver.
Not really. They offered some very minor constitutional reforms. And worse, they doubled down on repression by passing the Rowlatt Act in 1919.
Which allowed detention without trial.
Exactly. Preventive detention, indefinite incarceration, no judicial review, basically. It was seen as a slap in the face after India's wartime sacrifices. This is what prompts Gandhi to call for a nationwide satyagraha.
And this leads into one of his most strategically complex moves, his support for the Khilafat movement. Why did he back a movement focused on the Turkish Caliphate?
Pure political strategy aimed at forging Hindu-Muslim unity. The Khilafat issue deeply agitated Indian Muslims, mostly Sunnis, who saw the post-war dismantling of the Ottoman Empire and the Caliphate as an attack on Islam itself.
So Gandhi saw an opportunity.
A golden opportunity, he thought, to bring Hindus and Muslims together on a common platform against the British. By championing the Khilafat cause, he gained immense support from Muslim leaders and communities, temporarily papering over communal tensions.
But not everyone was convinced this was controversial.
Highly controversial. On the Hindu side, figures like the poet Rabindranath Tagore were deeply skeptical. They questioned why the Indian independence movement should tie itself to what they saw as a pan-Islamic, somewhat backward-looking cause.
And on the Muslim side?
Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was then in the Congress Party but becoming increasingly alienated, strongly opposed Gandhi's whole non-cooperation approach. Jinnah was a constitutionalist. He believed in negotiation and working within the system. He saw Gandhi's mass movements as chaotic, potentially violent, and ultimately counterproductive.
So you already see that fundamental clash in strategy between Gandhi and Jinnah years before partition.
Absolutely. It's a crucial early indicator of the diverging paths they would take.
The tension around the Rowlatt Act boils over with the horrific Jallianwala Bagh massacre in Amritsar, April 1919.
A truly brutal event. General Dyer orders his troops to fire, without warning, into a dense, peaceful crowd gathered in an enclosed garden Jallianwala Bagh. They were protesting the Rowlatt Act. Men, women, children, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs. Hundreds were killed, many more wounded. Dyer blocked the exits first.
An absolute atrocity. And it galvanized the entire country against the British.
It did. But Gandhi's reaction was, again, somewhat unexpected. He condemned the British brutality, of course, but he also criticized...
From his own side.
Yes. He was so committed to absolute nonviolence, ahimsa, that he criticized Indians who had responded to the repression with sporadic violence or destruction of property elsewhere. He insisted that the response to governmental hate must be pure love or nonviolence. He demanded stricter adherence to the nonviolence pledge. For him, the massacre reinforced the need for complete Swaraj self-rule because the British system was inherently violent.
This period also sees him really pushing the economic dimension of independence with Swadeshi.
Right. Swadeshi, meaning of one's own country. This was the call to boycott foreign goods, especially British cloth, which had decimated India's traditional textile industry.
And promoting khadi, the homespun cloth.
Passionately. He urged everyone, rich and poor, to spin their own yarn and wear khadi. It was symbolic, identifying with the poorest villagers, but also practical. It was a direct economic assault on British imports and aimed to build self-reliance. Wearing khadi became the uniform of the independence movement.
His leadership of the non-cooperation movement eventually lands him in jail in 1922.
Yes, charged with sedition. He gave a famous speech at his trial, essentially pleading guilty to disaffection towards the government. He was sentenced to 6 years.
But he didn't serve the full term.
No, he was released early in 1924 after an appendicitis operation and due to his generally poor health. But he came out to a changed landscape.
How so?
The non-cooperation movement had largely fizzled out in his absence. Crucially, the Khilafat movement had collapsed. Kemal Ataturk abolished the caliphate in Turkey itself, making the whole issue moot. And tragically, the Hindu-Muslim unity Gandhi had tried to build had fractured. Communal riots were breaking out again. It must have been deeply discouraging for him.
Which sets the stage for his next major campaign, maybe the most iconic of all, the Salt Satyagraha in 1930. This is where things get really dramatic.
Absolutely. The Salt March is probably the single most famous image associated with Gandhi. And for good reason. It was a masterstroke of political theater and moral resistance.
It started with that letter to the Viceroy, Lord Irwin.
An extraordinary letter. He basically lays out the case against British rule, calling it a curse that has impoverished India. He makes this incredibly pointed comparison between the Viceroy's enormous salary and the average Indian's income. Over 5,000 times India's average income, he wrote. It framed the struggle in stark economic terms.
And the target was the salt tax. Why salt?
Because salt was a basic necessity, used by everyone, rich and poor. But the British government had a monopoly on its production and sale and imposed a heavy tax. It was a perfect symbol of colonial exploitation hitting the poorest hardest.
So the plan was the Dandi March.
A 24-day, 388-kilometer, about 240 miles, trek from his ashram to the coastal village of Dandi. He started with just 78 carefully chosen followers.
But it grew.
Massively. As they walked through villages, thousands joined in or lined the route. It became this huge national event, a pilgrimage almost. The goal was simple: reach the sea and make salt illegally by evaporating seawater, thereby defying the British monopoly and the tax.
And the climax wasn't just the march itself, but what happened afterwards at the Dharasana Salt Works. The accounts from journalists there, like Webb Miller.
Yes, Webb Miller's reporting for United Press was crucial. It brought the reality of the repression to a global audience. After Gandhi was arrested for initiating the salt-making, the protests continued. At Dharasana, volunteers, led by figures like Sarojini Naidu, planned to non-violently walk into the salt works and claim the salt.
And the police response.
Brutal. Miller described it vividly. Lines of disciplined, completely non-resistant protesters walking forward, and the police just wading into them with steel-tipped, lathis, heavy bamboo sticks.
Beating them down.
Systematically. Miller wrote about sickening thuds, men falling like ninepins, skulls fractured, shoulders broken, lying unconscious. But crucially, none of them fought back. They just kept coming, wave after wave, enduring the blows.
That image of peaceful protesters absorbing brutal violence without retaliating must have been incredibly powerful internationally.
Devastating for Britain's image. Miller's dispatches were published worldwide. It showed the moral bankruptcy of violently suppressing peaceful protest, and the role of women in the Salt Satyagraha was also significant.
How so? Gandhi had initially hesitated about involving them, right?
He did, fearing the British might accuse him of using women as a shield, or that the women might face unacceptable violence. But thousands of women disregarded his caution and joined in enthusiastically picketing liquor shops, protesting, facing arrest and abuse alongside the men. It was a major moment for women's participation in public life in India.
The sheer impact of the Salt Satyagraha forces the British to negotiate.
Yes, it leads to the Gandhi-Irwin Pact in 1931. Irwin agrees to release political prisoners, and Gandhi agrees to suspend civil disobedience and attend the Second Roundtable Conference in London to discuss constitutional reform.
So Gandhi goes to London as the sole representative of the Indian National Congress.
He does, and he makes quite a statement there too, choosing to stay in Kingsley Hall in the working-class East End, meeting textile workers in Lancashire whose jobs were affected by the Swadeshi boycott. It reinforced his image as a man of the people.
But the conference itself was a disappointment.
A major disappointment for Gandhi and Congress. The British skillfully steered the conversation away from immediate independence or dominion status. They focused instead on the complexities, the demands of the princely states, the concerns of various minorities, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Anglo-Indians, untouchables. It became clear Britain wasn't ready to grant real power.
And this is when Winston Churchill really unleashes his famous disdain for Gandhi.
Oh, yes. Churchill was implacably opposed to Indian independence and saw Gandhi as the main obstacle. He delivered that incredibly famous, venomous line, calling Gandhi a seditious Middle Temple lawyer, now posing as a fakir of a type well known in the East, striding half naked up the steps of the viceregal palace.
Wow, strong stuff.
Churchill consistently painted him as a dangerous fanatic. Ironically, this kind of high-profile attack from someone like Churchill probably only boosted Gandhi's standing in many eyes.
Back in India, the struggle continues, and another major conflict arises over the communal award in 1932.
Right. The British proposed a new constitution that included separate electorates not just for Muslims and Sikhs, but also for the depressed classes, or untouchables as they were then called.
Gandhi opposes vehemently. Why?
He was in prison at the time, but he saw separate electorates for untouchables whom he started calling Harijans, meaning children of God, as a disastrous step. He feared it would permanently divide them from the rest of the Hindu community, fragmenting the independence movement and potentially creating lasting social fissures. He felt it undermined the fight against untouchability itself.
So he undertook another fast.
A fast unto death from Yerwada jail. This put immense pressure on everyone, particularly on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the main political leader of the Untouchables, who had initially favored separate electorates as a way to guarantee political power for his community.
Leading to the Pune Pact.
Exactly. Ambedkar, under huge pressure and concern for Gandhi's life, agreed to a compromise. The Pune Pact scrapped the separate electorates, but significantly increased the number of reserved seats for the depressed classes within the general Hindu electorate. It was a compromise, ensuring representation without formal separation, but the disagreement between Gandhi and Ambedkar over the best path for Dalit emancipation remained profound.
Fast forward to World War II. India is dragged into the war without consultation, leading to the Quit India movement in 1942.
Gandhi and the Congress were clear. India could not participate in a war supposedly for democratic freedom while being denied its own freedom. When the British refused to guarantee independence after the war, Gandhi launched the Quit India movement.
With that famous call, do or die.
Garo ya Maro. It was a call for mass civil disobedience on an unprecedented scale. He urged Indians to act as if they were already free, to withdraw all cooperation from the British administration. But, and he stressed this, they must do so nonviolently, no killing or harming British officials.
But violence did erupt.
Massively. The British responded instantly, arresting Gandhi and the entire Congress leadership within hours of the speech. With the leadership jailed, the movement became spontaneous and often violent. Protesters attacked government buildings, burned railway stations, cut telegraph lines. Over 1,000 Indians were killed in the ensuing crackdown.
And Gandhi was imprisoned again, this time at the Aga Khan Palace. A difficult time for him personally, too.
Very difficult. His longtime secretary, Mahadev Desai, died of a heart attack in custody. And then, in February 1944, his wife Kasturba died while still imprisoned with him. It was a huge personal blow.
He's finally released in May 1944 due to his failing health. But the India he emerges into is politically very different.
Radically different. The Congress leadership had been sidelined in prison for years. In that vacuum, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Muslim League had grown immensely powerful. Their demand was no longer just for safeguards, but for a separate, sovereign state, Pakistan.
And Gandhi remained completely opposed to partition.
Vehemently opposed. His vision was for a united, independent India where Hindus and Muslims could coexist peacefully. He argued partition on religious lines was morally wrong, a denial of their shared heritage, and fundamentally a denial of the concept of a single Atman or soul uniting all people.
But Jinnah wouldn't budge.
Jinnah rejected Gandhi's vision entirely. He believed Hindus and Muslims were two distinct nations who could not live together in one state. This impasse led directly to the horrors of partition.
Starting with Jinnah's call for Direct Action Day in August 1946.
Which triggered horrific communal riots. Starting in Calcutta, thousands were killed in just a few days. The violence spread like wildfire across northern India. It was religious cleansing on a terrifying scale.
So when independence finally comes, at midnight on August 15, 1947, dividing the subcontinent into India and Pakistan, Gandhi isn't celebrating.
Far from it. He refused to participate in the official ceremonies in Delhi. He was in Calcutta, fasting and walking through riot-torn areas, trying desperately to plead for peace as millions were uprooted in the largest forced migration in human history, and hundreds of thousands, maybe more, were slaughtered in communal violence.
His final act, the fast in Delhi in January 1948, seems like a last, desperate attempt to stem the tide.
It was. His main goal was to shock the conscience of both communities, to stop the killing in Delhi. But it had another very specific political aim, too.
Which was?
To pressure the newly independent Indian government, led by Nehru and Patel, to release the cash assets 550 million rupees that were owed to Pakistan as part of the partition agreement. India had withheld the payment because of the conflict erupting over Kashmir.
And Gandhi felt this was unjust.
He felt it was morally wrong to withhold the funds, regardless of the political conflict. He believed it would only deepen the bitterness. His fast succeeded, the government agreed to release the money, but it further angered Hindu hardliners who saw him as betraying India's interests in favor of Pakistan.
Which brings us to the bedrock of all this action, Part 4. His principles, practices, and beliefs. What drove him? It all comes back to Satya, doesn't it? Truth.
Absolutely. His entire life, as he described it, was a series of experiments with truth. Discovering Satya and living by it was his ultimate goal. He famously summed it up: truth is God.
And Satyagraha, his method, flows directly from that. How does the philosophy connect to the action?
It's deeply rooted in Hindu philosophy, particularly Advaita Vedanta. The core idea of Advaita is non-dualism, the belief that underlying the apparent diversity of the world is one single ultimate reality.
And the concept of Atman.
Crucial. Atman is the individual soul, but in Advaita, the individual soul is identical to Brahman, the universal soul or ultimate reality. So the same divine essence is within every single being: you, me, the person protesting, the soldier oppressing them.
So if everyone shares the same essential soul,
Then harming another person is, in a metaphysical sense, harming yourself, harming God, harming truth. Ahimsa, non-harm or non-violence, becomes not just a moral preference, but a logical consequence of this worldview.
so Satyagraha isn't just passive resistance. It's an active force aimed at what? Converting the opponent.
Exactly. It's soul force. The aim isn't to coerce or defeat the opponent, but to awaken their own sense of truth and justice, to purify them, to lift the conflict onto a higher moral plane. It requires immense self-discipline from the Satyagrahi: no impatience, no barbarity, no insolence, as Gandhi put it. It relies on self-suffering, willingly accepting punishment, without retaliating as the means to melt the opponent's heart.
But we keep coming back to that nuance about nonviolence and cowardice. It wasn't absolute pacifism in all circumstances for him.
No, and this is often misunderstood. He saw ahimsa as infinitely superior to violence. But
Yeah.
But he explicitly stated he preferred violence to cowardice.
You quote that again, striking.
He said he would rather have India resort to arms in order to defend her honor than that she should, in a cowardly manner, become or remain a helpless witness to her own dishonor.
So for him, courage was the prerequisite. Nonviolence was the highest form of courage. But if you didn't have the courage for nonviolent resistance, then fighting back physically was better than passive submission out of fear.
Precisely. Nonviolence had to be the choice of the strong, the brave. If it stemmed from weakness or fear, it lost its moral power. You had to be capable of resisting, preferably non-violently, but resisting nonetheless.
Let's talk about brahmacharya. This goes way beyond just celibacy for him.
Oh, much further. He took the vow of sexual abstinence in 1906 when he was 37. But for Gandhi, brahmacharya meant complete control over all the senses, not just sex. It extended to diet, hence his experiments with food, like giving up cow's milk because he thought it stimulated passion, to speech, to thought. It was about achieving perfect self-mastery, conserving vital energy, which he believed was essential for spiritual growth and for wielding soul force effectively in the political realm. He felt personal purity was linked to political power.
But this led him to some very controversial practices later in life, particularly after Kasturba died. These experiments with celibacy.
Yes, these are perhaps the most difficult and debated aspects of his later years. Starting around 1945 and intensifying after Kasturba's death in 44, he undertook practices to test his control over his vow of celibacy.
Which involved sleeping near or even in the same bed with young women.
Yes, including, towards the very end of his life, his grandnieces, Manu and Abha, who were teenagers or very young women at the time. Often the sources say he and the women involved would be naked.
And the reaction to this was immediate criticism.
Intense criticism, even from within his inner circle. Several close associates resigned in protest. Nirmal Kumar Bose, his Bengali interpreter and a trusted friend, directly challenged Gandhi about it. Bose wasn't accusing him of sexual misconduct. The consensus is that no sexual act occurred, but he was deeply concerned about the psychological impact on the young women involved.
What was Gandhi's justification? How did he explain these actions?
His rationale was that this was the ultimate test of his brahmacharya. Could he remain completely unmoved, mentally and physically, even in the most potentially stimulating circumstances? He felt that if he couldn't, his claim to spiritual purity, his status as a Mahatma, was potentially fraudulent. He argued that stopping the experiments because of criticism would be a sign of weakness, a lack of faith in his own self-control. It remains a deeply complex and troubling part of his story.
He certainly documented his life and thoughts extensively. His writings are a huge resource.
Absolutely prolific. He edited several newspapers, Indian Opinion in South Africa, then Young India, and Harijan in India. These were crucial platforms for spreading his ideas. His autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, is a classic of spiritual self-examination. And his early work, Hind Swaraj, or Indian Home Rule, written in 1909, really laid out his fundamental critique of Western civilization and his vision for an independent India based on soul force.
Which leads us to the end, part 5. Death and enduring global legacy. His assassination feels almost like a grim culmination of the divisions he fought against.
It does. January 30th, 1948. He's 78 years old, walking to his regular evening interfaith prayer meeting at Birla House in Delhi. Nathuram Godse steps out of the crowd.
A Hindu nationalist.
Yes, linked to radical groups like the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS. Godse believed Gandhi had consistently appeased Muslims and betrayed Hindu interests, especially by forcing the government to pay the cash assets to Pakistan during his recent fast. He fired 3 shots into Gandhi's chest at point-blank range.
The nation was plunged into grief. Nehru's radio address is unforgettable.
The light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere. It captured the sense of shock and profound loss. Our beloved leader, Bapu as we called him, the father of the nation, is no more. The funeral procession in Delhi was enormous, over 1 million people. The procession itself stretching for miles to his cremation site at Rajghat.
And he's remembered with those affectionate, respectful titles.
Bapu, meaning father, and Rafrapita, father of the nation. That title was actually first used for him by Subhas Chandra Bose back in 1944, interestingly enough. And globally, his birthday, October 2nd, is the UN's International Day of Nonviolence.
His influence clearly didn't stop at India's borders.
Yeah.
The impact on the U.S. civil rights movement alone is immense.
Absolutely central. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., James Lawson, James Bevel, John Lewis, they all consciously studied and adapted Gandhi's methods of nonviolent direct action. King's famous quote sums it up: Christ gave us the goals and Mahatma Gandhi the tactics.
And in South Africa itself, Nelson Mandela.
Mandela greatly admired Gandhi, despite the complexities of Gandhi's early views there. Mandela saw Gandhi's struggle against racial discrimination as a precursor to the anti-apartheid movement. Scholars often say Mandela completed what Gandhi started in the fight for a non-racial democracy in South Africa.
Even someone like Albert Einstein recognized his unique stature.
Einstein had a profound respect for him, called him a role model for the generations to come, and predicted his moral influence would outlast the brutal, violent forces of their time. And that famous line, "Generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon this earth."
Yet, despite all this global acclaim, there's the famous Nobel Peace Prize omission.
Yes, quite remarkable. Nominated 5 times between 1937 and 1948, but never awarded the prize. Years later, the Nobel Committee itself acknowledged this was a huge mistake, calling it the greatest omission in our 106-year history.
Why wasn't he awarded it? Especially in 1948, the year he died.
The committee considered it in 48, but ultimately decided not to award the prize to anyone that year. Their reasoning mentioned no suitable living candidate, which many interpreted as an indirect admission that Gandhi was the most suitable candidate. But the rules at the time didn't allow for posthumous awards, and perhaps they felt no one else measured up after his death just before the nomination deadline.
So, looking at India today, how does his legacy resonate? Has India embraced his full vision?
It's a mixed picture, isn't it? India deeply reveres him as the father of the nation. His political legacy, the commitment to democracy, secularism, tolerance, is foundational to India's identity.
Wait, his economic ideas.
Largely rejected, yes. His vision of a decentralized, village-based economy emphasizing self-sufficiency, khadi, and austerity. Well, post-independence India, under Nehru and subsequent governments, chose a path of industrialization, modernization, and integration into the global economy. So, politically, he's revered. Economically, his path wasn't followed.
Which brings us back to that core tension, that central paradox of his life.
He achieved something extraordinary, maybe unique in history, leading a successful mass movement that defeated a powerful empire through nonviolent means. He proved satyagraha could work on a massive political scale.
He literally changed the world with soul force.
He did. Yet, the ultimate political goal, an independent, united India, wasn't achieved. He couldn't prevent the horrific violence of partition, the very division he fought so hard against.
So the final thought for you, the listener, to perhaps grapple with is this. Gandhi demonstrated that nonviolence could indeed conquer an empire. But could it conquer the deep-seated divisions within a society itself? He won independence, but could Satyagraha ultimately overcome the communal hatred that tore the subcontinent apart right at the moment of its birth? That's something worth mulling over.